So, welcome to the final local lit at Lotta. Um, we've been running for 2 years, and they've been a wonderful 2 years. And this event, I feel very proud of. I feel like we've brought together some community around local authors and literature and the love of reading and story, and that's that's been very gratifying to me, and it's been especially fun to see certain regulars always coming back, like Marissa and Kate and Josie. And Bob, who was reading for us tonight, but I don't think has missed a performance. So, um, so here we are in our first virtual event and also our last event. And Local Lit at Lotta, it owes a debt of gratitude to Luke and Misty Hanscom, who own Lotta Studios, where all of the events occurred until tonight, and Bennett Lovett-Graff, who advised me when I was thinking about this event back in January 2018. Also to our editor-producers, me, but Emmett McMullen, who is our tech wizard tonight, but also, essential on our editorial board. Aaron Townsend, who was my first partner in this crime, and Sarah Harris-Woolman, who has been absolutely crucial in our editorial board. We've welcomed many wonderful authors whose names just disappeared from the screen, but also Mikhail Mulvey, Susan Nathiel, Josie Queen, Charles Rafferty, Tara L. Roy, Anita Sawyer, Shelley Storr, Michael Tenney, Aaron Townsend, Sarah Harris-Woolman, and Robert Wexler. I wish I could make it go back, but hold on, I'll find a way to read the other names because I have it on my phone. Sorry, I'm going to make you wait just for a minute while I find these other authors. Okay, also Nancy Antle, Robert Beech, Larry Bloom, Amy Bowers, Rick Feltington, Lisa Gaudio, Cindy House, Jennifer Hudson, Mackenzie Hurlburt, Carolyn Lush, and Bethany J. Miller. And something that I think has been really special about this event is that although we definitely required that stories meet a certain standard of professionalism or excellence before we would accept them, we did not prefer writers with a certain level of experience. So we have hosted authors who had never published their work and never read it in front of an audience. And we also showcased authors with a wealth of experience, highly published authors, authors who are teachers as well of literature or other types of writing. So that's what we've been about, is giving authors from the New Haven area a chance to share their work with an audience of the general public, the experience of reading it aloud, and then also hearing feedback, facilitated discussion so that comments would be helpful, not just I liked it or oh I was bored, but like really substantive feedback. And I know that I've learned some things along the way in this process of each event, and other people have told me that they have, and so that's it. We've done this for 2 great years, and I'm sorry to see it come to an end, but thankfully we've built a lovely community around this, and I feel like I'll see many, if not all, of the folks involved at some point or another. So without further ado, I want to welcome Mackenzie Hurlburt to the screen. Mackenzie, this is your second time reading for us, I believe. Let me unmute you. Unmute. Are you unmuting yourself
Okay.
as well?
Yep.
Okay, great, great, great. So, and I'm going to read your bio really quickly. So Mackenzie is a Connecticut-based writer whose previous publications appeared in Hofstra's Windmill and the anthology We Walk Invisible. She received honorable mention in Writer's Digest Popular Fiction Awards for her story Milk Teeth, which she will read to us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Mackenzie. Okay, let me mute myself.
Awesome. Thank you. And if at any point I speak too quietly, don't be afraid to jump in and nudge me if you don't mind. I will try to project, though. It's kind of hard to tell when you're in a Zoom versus in person.
You're very good. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect volume.
Great. Okay, so this is Milk Teeth. After losing her daughter in the gray days of April, Edith Thompson took to gardening. For those first few weeks after the wake and funeral, where a half-size casket had cradled her child, after the heavy, scented flowers disintegrated into piles of crunchy petals and rigid stalks, Edith reached into the earth. While her husband sat at the kitchen table eating a casserole from a well-meaning neighbor, Edith wandered to her backyard and sifted through the dirt. She bought seeds, tomato, watermelon, pepper, poppy, sunflower, that rattled in their paper packets. Edith placed each one gently in finger-deep divots, and in June, after no green tips emerged from the soil, she purchased a tray of zucchini and cucumber sprouts and planted them, one by one, along the edge of her garden. Edith, honey, they're too close, Ned said, when he found her one morning kneeling in the dark soil. Wearing only her night shift, she sat back on her heels. A wandering hand passed her cheek, leaving a streak of dirt. Her eyes met his, vacant. They'll cross-pollinate. You'll have a bunch of mutant squash cucumbers trying to take over the world. Ned bugged out his eyes like he once did for their daughter Allie when he was telling a scary story. Edith shrugged. It's not like we'd eat them anyway, she said, fitting each plant into its crater. Once placed, she patted soil around their bases, tucking them in with a concentrated effort. Then why plant them, Ned thought, but he could guess at the answer. Within 2 weeks, each of the sprouts' leaves turned a toxic yellow. Each night after dinner, Edith watched their withered forms from the window over the sink, scrubbing and rinsing the same dish until Ned distracted her with something else. He had tried to help. When Edith went to the doctor's or grocery shopping after work, he'd run the hose and soak the soil, praying, though he wasn't a religious man, for some hint of green. These doctor visits were more and more frequent, and though Edith didn't say much, Ned suspected and hoped they were appointments with a shrink in town. Edith had stopped eating, rejected his affections, and refused to say Allie's name. Ned believed when Allie died, she took with her all that was alive in her mother. It was during one of Edith's appointments when Ned found the teeth. Edith had kept them in the top drawer of their kitchen island, wrapped in a thin sandwich bag, cinched shut with one of Allie's butterfly bobbled hair ties. He undid the tie and poured the 3 milk teeth into his palm. Their jagged bottoms had once been tucked beneath his daughter's gums, now sharp as a broken bottle. He couldn't believe how light they were and fragile. He thought of her small white hand in his. Alone in the kitchen, Ned let out a breath and felt his throat tighten. Closing his eyes to hold back hot tears, Ned clasped the teeth in his fist. He couldn't remember the sound of his daughter's voice. The truth of it pierced him. Allie, he sobbed. He slammed his fist on the counter and felt the teeth bite into the flesh of his palm. Collapsing on the kitchen floor, he leaned up against the bottom cabinets and cried into the crook of his arm. He rode out the flow of grief as he always did, expelling it all in these moments of privacy. When it had passed, Ned wiped the tears from his cheeks with his knuckles and focused on his breathing. His fist ached, and when he unfurled his fingers, he could see the teeth have broken the skin. They were tinged pink with blood. "Allie," he said, again, this time a whisper. He thought he felt the air electrify. He remembered her giggling in the grass outside. In fact, he could almost hear it. His breath caught, then the neighbor started his lawnmower. Tucking the plastic baggie, hair tie, and its contents into his breast pocket, Ned headed outside to water Edith's dying zucchini plants. The cucumbers were going as well, their leaves shriveling into themselves and growing smaller each day. He patted the teeth in his breast pocket. Returning them meant risking the chance Edith would uncover them. They could trigger a breakdown, Ned thought, and he'd find her crying in the shower again, or she'd withdraw even more, sinking into herself and hiding behind those gray eyes and pallid face. He could flush them down the toilet, but no, they were a part of Allie. He couldn't get rid of them. He heard Edith's car creak into the driveway and groan to a halt. Kneeling down, Ned pulled the baggie from his pocket and tightened the tie. Using one hand, he dug a hole as deep as he could in the loose soil and placed the milk teeth far into the shadows. Plowing the dirt back into place, he brushed off his hands and rose to his feet. Edith was behind him. He could feel her heaviness. "Hey, hun," he said, turning around. "How was the doctor's?" Edith blinked off his greeting. Her small frame was lost in the folds of her dress. A paper bag hung from a limp hand at her side. "What are you doing?" she asked, taking in his dirty knees and the nearby hose. Ned cleared his throat. "Just figured I'd water the plants for you, and then, I thought I saw something popping up, like a sprout from those seeds you planted." Edith barked a laugh without smiling. Ned didn't know that was possible. She turned to the house, and he took a few big steps to reach her side. "How was work?" he asked. "It was work. There was a shipment today, right?" She kept her eyes on the ground. "It was okay. Roger called in sick, so I had to cover his load and mine, but I got out early because a new kid helped. They think next week." He dwindled off. She wasn't listening. Edith took quicker steps, and he let her get away. At the doorway, he kicked the dirt off his shoes and brushed the soil from his knee. Then he took a breath and went inside. "Edith?" "Ned." She put her bag on the counter and turned to face him. "I miss her too, But she loved you. She wouldn't want to see you well, remember that time with Sam the Sock? She put on a puppet show, and when the power was out, all Allie wanted to do was make you smile." "Just stop," Edith snapped. Turning her back to him, she went about putting away the groceries. That night, he woke up to an empty bed. She was outside, kneeling in the dirt, hunched over something. Her back heaved, and Ned could guess she was sobbing. He thought about going down there, placing his hand on her bare shoulder and guiding her back to bed. Instead, he turned and slipped under the comforter. When he woke up, Edith had left for work, and the only trace that she had returned after her visit to the garden were the sheets on her side, smudged brown with soil. A few days passed before Ned went back to water the garden, and there it was, just a sprout, a tiny green spike emerging from the earth. It was just a little thing, but it looked healthy, vigorous even, when compared with the shriveled cucumber remains. When Edith got home that night, he decided to bring it up. "Edith, did you see the garden today?" His wife feigned disinterest and shrugged. "No, why?" "There's a sprout." She looked at the space over his head. "Oh, please." "Edith, there's a sprout. You've grown something." She didn't believe him, ventured outside in her bare feet to see for herself. The green seemed to glow in the beam of her flashlight. Ned hugged her. "I don't know what took, but we've got a green little sprout. Isn't that great? I knew there was something wrong with those cucumber plants." Edith stared at the tilled earth for a moment before smiling, a soft, sad smile of relief. "Yeah, it's good news, Ned. It's good." Every night, Edith went out to the garden, gliding under the moonlight in her white shift. Ned pretended not to notice, changed the sheets when they got too dirty, and mopped up her muddy footprints in the morning. Edith started to smile more. Her face regained color, a glow even, and her figure started to soften. There were fewer and fewer doctor visits, and one night they even made love before going to sleep, something they hadn't done in months. The sprout grew inches each day. At first, Ned thought it was a sunflower, but as the leaves unfurled and stretched higher, he discarded the idea. In 2 weeks, the stem thickened and it greedily reached out to the open air with wiry tendrils. As time passed, the plant grew in height and width, spreading across the tilled earth of their garden in a tangle of thorny stems and vines. By mid-July, the plant had consumed the entire plot, and its leaves multiplied, thickening its form into an impenetrable mass. Ned clipped away the tendrils that reached beyond the garden's edge, but other than that, Edith cared for it, watering it daily and showering it with green pellets of fertilizer like confetti. There were no flowers or buds, just leaves with serrated edges that clung to your clothes like Velcro, and thorny, thick vines that leaked milky sap when pruned. Ned's stomach turned with the thought of it. He found the plant had a smell, a heavy, humid stench, like overripe bananas. Edith didn't seem to mind. When Ned had mentioned it, she laughed and told him he was sniffing too much exhaust fumes from the delivery truck. Edith would visit the plant in the darkness of night and walk circles around it as Ned watched from the shadows of their bedroom window. She'd return to bed with the putrid scent in her hair. When Ned kissed her goodbye in the morning, he could swear he tasted it on her lips. By August, the plant had grown a head taller than him and cast a shadow on their yard. Ned was finding its leaves everywhere, in the shower, under the couch, and clinging to the back of his uniform for work. Edith wore its scent as a perfume, but she smiled more, and that's all Ned had really wanted, wasn't it? She kissed him good morning with a new intensity and had rediscovered her old laugh, the one that had made him fall in love with her. While her happiness was a relief to him, Ned knew he was not the cause of this change and couldn't help but eye the plant with envy. During one of Edith's late-night walks, Ned awoke to a giggle. He heard it, the long, lilting giggle of a girl rolling in the grass. He sat up alone in bed and listened. After a few beats of silence, he walked over to the window to look out on the yard. Edith had dropped to her knees beside the plant and was reaching into it, as if petting something or tickling it. Unsettled, Ned slipped on his shoes and went down to see what she was doing. When he was standing on the grass behind her, he could hear she was singing, "You Are My Sunshine," a tune she used to hum to Allie. He couldn't see what her hands were touching. The leaves of the plant had engulfed Edith's arms past her elbows. In a breathy soprano, she sang, "You make me happy when clouds are gray." Ned swallowed hard. Hearing Edith sing those words again flooded his mind with memories of Allie's nursery, the creak of the rocker, the softened darkness that smelled of powder and baby. "What are you doing?" he asked. Edith yelped, startled at the sound of his voice. "Damn it, Ned, you scared me." She withdrew her arms from the plant and stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. One of the plant's leaves stuck to the hem of her nightdress. "Jesus, Edith, look at your arms." Her forearms were covered with scratches, thin red lines where thorns must have caught her. "What were you thinking?" "I was just singing to it," Edith said, slipping her hand into his and guiding him back toward the house. She looked years younger under the moonlight, luminescent, magical. "I was telling my doctor about it, and he said plants grow stronger if you sing to them." She squeezed his hand. Ned left his hand in hers, but did not return the squeeze. "At 2 a.m, though?" Edith smiled and shrugged. "I couldn't sleep." And with that, she let go of his hand, pecked his cheek, and bounded into the house. When he found her upstairs, he pulled her into the bathroom and washed her scratched arms with cotton swabs and peroxide. She didn't flinch at the sting. "What were you reaching for in there?" Ned said, returning the bottle of peroxide to the bathroom cabinet. His wife sat on the toilet and watched him, smiling. "I thought I saw something." "Like what?" "I'm not sure, it was dark." Edith let out a wide yawn, not bothering to cover her mouth. Her full lips, her flushed cheeks. Ned barely recognized this person. Even so, when he reached their bed and she greeted him with warm hands, he embraced her all the same. It was like making love to a complete stranger, and afterwards, Edith fell asleep, naked in their tangle of sheets, and Ned stared at the ceiling, feeling guilty, but satisfied. September brought what Ned expected to be the most challenging hurdle they'd faced since the funeral, Allie's birthday. It was this time the previous year when the doctors found the tumor, and Allie had spent her 9th and last birthday with that diagnosis looming over her. Diagnosis, such a big word for a 9-year-old. She brushed it off, though, and was determined to have the best birthday yet. They brought her to the city zoo and the botanical gardens, where they watched her ride an elephant and feed a giraffe. Ned could still hear her giggle as the giraffe's blue tongue curled around her small hand. They had walked through the tropical plants in the greenhouse, and she had Ned smell all the flowers. Edith and Allie posed for a photo by the koi pond, Allie's green eyes popping among the foliage, and Edith's thin, forced smile barely concealing her emotions. They visited the gift store before they left, and Ned told her to pick out a souvenir. While Allie was debating between a stuffed lemur and a hat with tiger ears, Edith started to cry again and had to go outside. He ended up buying Allie both, and then threw in some cotton candy, which she devoured on the ride home. With the distraction of the plant outside, Edith and Ned didn't discuss the approaching date. He grew more involved with work, covering late shifts as much as he could, and she tended to the garden. The plant's height had more than doubled in the past few weeks, and in order to support it, the stems had thickened into trunks. On the night before Allie's birthday, Ned pretended to sleep as his wife slipped out of bed once more. He sat up and watched through their bedroom window as Edith walked across the lawn and knelt beside the plant. It cast a shadow, and when Edith left the moonlit yard to stand at the garden's edge, Ned could just about make out her pale shape. He could see her gesturing, as if she was having a conversation. He watched as her shadowed figure leaned back and laughed. Sour jealousy bloomed in his chest. He didn't bother to put his shoes on. He was down the stairs and on the grass beside her in moments. The moon had slipped behind a cloud, and all was dark. Edith, honey, this is enough. He kept his voice flat, a tone he never used with her. She stayed facing the plant as if he'd said nothing. You're worrying me, he said, a bit softer this time, and stepped forward to rest a hand on her bare shoulder. She shuddered at his touch. What time is it? She asked, still ignoring his comments. Past 1. Let's go to bed. Edith shook her head. She was born at 1:11, remember? 111, an angel number, a lucky number. She looked up at Ned, and in her gray eyes he saw pain and anger and defiance, but most of all, a bottomless sadness. He knelt down beside her in the grass and wrapped his arms around her cold shoulders. I miss her too, he said, and sighed into the night. With those words, the moon emerged again, and the plant began to shift, as if fidgety with nerves. Leaves rustled, vines bent, and soon the entire garden seemed to shudder with energy. They stood, and Ned took a step back as the vines of the plant reached out, extending up into the air and to either side. Leaves shook free and fell around them, clinging to their clothes and hair. The stems of the plant bent to the left and right. Ned could hear a deep groan, but he wasn't sure if it came from the plant or Edith. In front of them, the plant parted to form a path. The moonshine illuminated a clearing at the end, the heart of the garden. Edith stepped forward, and Ned reached to grab her hand. Something was moving at the end of the path. He could see it. He meant to pull Edith back, to guide her to the house, back to their bed where they could fall asleep and wake up in the morning and pretend it had all been a dream. But when he saw the movement in the moonlight, the pulse of a presence, of life, he took her hand and let her lead him in. Barefoot, they passed between the walls of thorns and leaves. As they entered the clearing, they saw what had moved. It was a giant fruit, or was it a bud, hanging 3 feet off the ground, pulsing offbeat as if something inside was struggling to escape. Ned reached out, placing his palm against its soft outer skin. It was warm against his hand. He could feel something inside shifting against the thick layers of flesh. Edith touched it too, smiling as the bulb reacted to her. It's her, she said, meeting Ned's gaze with wide eyes. She smiled and looked back to the plant. Ned couldn't speak. He wanted Allie back, wanted to remember her voice, how her hand felt in his, His gaze fell to Edith's arms lined with scratches, and he breathed in the sour, putrid scent of rotten fruit. How could something he wanted so much seem so wrong? Come on home, honey, Edith said, stroking the bud. It jerked hard, swinging a bit in the air. Ned pulled Edith back by the shoulder and stood on the edge of the clearing, with his arms wrapped tightly around her. He could feel her hold her breath, and they watched as one fleshy outer layer unfurled, and then another. The sour stench filled the air, but Ned was too distracted to gag. Emerging from the wet, flexing petals of the bud was a child, slippery and bare in the moonlight. A soft, white child's foot dropped to the grass, and then another, legs thin like reeds, the small impression of a navel. With one large pulse, the bud birthed the child into the night, letting it collapse in a slick heap on the grass. Ned and Edith were frozen as the child, shivering, rose to its knees. Its eyes were closed, its hair dark with the bud slime, clung to its cheeks, neck, and shoulders. It looked innocent to Ned, just a small child's face with closed eyes and a pink mouth. It tilted to meet the moonlight and parted its lips as if taking a breath. And then its eyes opened, and they were green, just like Allie's. Ned choked back a sob. Edith clapped, laughing, and the child's face grinned, showing the pearly white caps of teeth. Edith held out her hand, but the child didn't move. Instead, the walls of vines and leaves around them shuddered, and a thorny tendril broke free to reach toward Edith's waiting palm. It wrapped in a snake-like coil around her wrist, and Ned watched as thorns bit flesh. Hi, sunshine, Edith whispered, smiling as the tendril tightened and cut deeper. Blood pooled around its grasp on Edith's wrists and fell in quick drops to the ground at her feet. The child with Allie's face met Edith's stare. A dark tongue escaped Allie's lips, wetting them and leaving them glistening in the moonlight. When the lips parted again, Ned held his breath. Hi, Mama, it said in the child's voice. It was so familiar and similar to Allie's, the voice he'd forgotten, that it made his heart flip. Yet, as those two words hung in the night air, Ned knew they were not spoken by his daughter. Though soft and sweet, the words carried a cavernous echo, a hollow, inhuman sound that hid behind Allie's voice like rot beneath a floorboard. He watched Allie's gaze shift to look at him and squeezed his eyes shut, a childish attempt to deny reality. Ned felt a leaf tickle the bare skin at the base of his neck. He heard that same hollow voice say, Hi, Papa. Ned hadn't screamed since he was a child, but when he did, it was a tiger roar that shook the trees. He sank into the black depths behind his eyelids, all the while hearing the lilting giggle of a girl in the grass and his wife's soft soprano. Beck, I think you're muted, just so you know.
Thank you. Thank you, Mackenzie. I've just unmuted everyone, including myself this time. I've tried to, but you can unmute yourselves if you like, so that we can applaud for Mackenzie.
Yay!
Yay. Thank you. Now we're going to begin the discussion, and the way that this will work is for the folks on YouTube, if you have any comments in response to the discussion questions that I present, you can write them in the chat and we will take a look at those. And for the folks in the Zoom room, I've unmuted everyone, but if you could keep yourself muted unless you actually have a comment or question, that would be helpful so that we won't hear a whole cacophony of background noise. So first of all, what is this story about? What is the plot? Anyone want to talk about the plot here? What happens?
Well, there's grief grief at the death of a child.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little unnatural grief.
Mm.
I don't know if grief over the death of a child can be unnatural, but it seems a little, I don't know what the word is to use.
It sounds like you're talking about Edith holding on to the grief such that she's giving up on her own life. Is that what you're talking about, Marissa?
Yeah, but I think Ned is also holding on to the grief, even though he doesn't let it show as much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have to watch Mackenzie's face to see what my comments is.
And Kate writes in the chat, the overtaking power of grief as it arrives in different forms. Yeah, I think that's a really nice summation of what the plot or what the story is about on one level thematically. Whose story is this?
Ned's?
Yeah, this is Ned's story. How do we know that?
Everything is from his point of view.
Exactly.
The whole story unfolds from his point of view.
Exactly. So even though it's told in what we call close third, meaning it's third person, but we're in that character's head, that is our clue. It's third person, but we're in Ned's head, so we know it's his story, because we're getting his perspective on everything. How did this story make you feel? Oh, and I'm sorry, Sarah. Sarah adds that Ned is the one who changed. Yeah, in the story. Edith appears to change in a certain way, but it's not, I think we get the sense that it's not a real change, right? It's a change born of this one particular wish that's been granted.
Yeah, like she never actually loses her fixation, right? She remains very deeply fixated. It's simply sort of transubstantiated. There's a transformation to what the object is, but what she actually cares about is still Allie the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then how does Ned change?
He's the one that planted the teeth.
Mm-hmm.
So he set things in motion.
That's true. That's the other good way that we know that it's his story. Yeah, thank you, Michael. And now back to the question I was starting to ask. How does this story make you feel? Kate says gutted. Any other emotional responses to the story?
Creepy. I think that would be the, I mean, it's a well-written horror story, so.
And scary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's kind of, for me, it gives me sort of like a thrilled feeling. I have a fondness for horror stories and weird tales and things like that, so there's a thrilling quality to it. But it's so deeply tinged with like a visceral personal horror in the midst of a supernatural horror, which is a neat two things to bridge together that sort of elevates the story.
Nice.
I think it was a good buildup of the tension. I think it was really,
anyone else notice the foreshadowing?
It made me anticipate certain things, and then when they happened, it still was very intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I second what Marissa said. There's still a little part of me that's like sort of hoping against hope with Ned that like maybe she's just back. Even though like I know on a deeper level like no, this is not Allie. But I really feel with Ned like, but maybe.
Yeah. Right, but maybe, and then can things go back to normal? You know, he'll get his wife back, he'll get his child back. So yeah, this is definitely a horror story, as Bob pointed out. Could this be any other genre?
Comic book.
Comic book. Oh, that's an interesting.
Well, Dr. Pamela Isley, also known as Poison Ivy, pulled off the same trick with her ex-husband and created plants that had her children.
Okay.
And then she grew sad because they died, and she, was heartbroken.
Oh wow. So that's not that's a comic book series. I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, she's one of Batman's villains.
Oh. Oh, I didn't know Poison Ivy. Okay, I've lost
Yeah.
track of my Batman villains.
Yeah, encouraging Michael's point, I think there's something into how Mackenzie tells the story. It's deeply visual in all these little motifs and details. You
Mhm.
see the mud on the bed, you see the height of the creature, the shadows and everything, the color of different details and parts of the world, and body parts and things like that. There's something vividly cinematic and environmental happening.
Definitely. And then seeing, little things like the description of Allie's green eyes, shining through the plants at the zoo. But then again, that's just all these little, like, or even on page 1, Ned warning Edith, you'll have a bunch of mutant squash cucumbers trying to take over the world. There's just foreshadowing throughout this piece. What other genre might this be? And what would have to change for it to be a different genre?
It could, this might be a bit of a stretch or might not be a finely enough defined genre, but I think that with just some mild modifications, it's just a fantasy story. In fact, like a 1,000-year-old Japanese fantasy story. There's this old myth of a widowed or no, they're not widowed. There is a couple. They're both still alive, but they've never had any children. They're very old. An old couple that lives in the wilderness. And one day they go cutting wood and they cut into this oversized bamboo, and there's just an actual little child in it who they adopt and raise as their own child. And it's like a happy relationship that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Kate says it could be. Wait, is that Kate saying that? No, Josie says it could be read as a fairy tale. And Kate says, I could see this as a powerful one-act play. Yeah, I could see this as a powerful one-act play too. That's a different form, but what genre would that one-act play be, Kate? Would your play still be a horror show? It may just be because I have love on the brain, because that's what I write all the time, but I thought about how this could be a romance. Like how, maybe you'd have to start earlier where the couple is, happy, or at least he's having memories of them being happy. And then they go descend, and then this, rebirth of this child brings them back together, and they're truly, it's romantic and joyful and whatever. I mean, it's definitely a creepy love story.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Rebecca. I think that it all depends on how much screen time you give each moment. The few sexual encounters that Edith and Ned have over the course of the story are like one sentence, whereas the time that we spend in the garden is the majority of it. So it's sort of where you point the camera, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I actually really like genre-wise how the story plays its cards kind of close to his chest at the beginning, which is a really bold, like risky thing to do, not to just be like from the first sentence, like, and then the mutant plant sprouted. Like it at first it sort of seems almost like this garden is like sort of it's a realistic story with this like sort of nice metaphor of the garden and new life. And then like it just kind of gradually is like, this is not a nice metaphor.
Yeah.
This is like, and to me that makes a really interesting point about the insidiousness of grief and the way that like it comes in waves, and like it's not just a trajectory where you just get over it.
Right. And I love how, speaking of that, leading up to the anniversary, there's the note about that, and so now they are avoiding each other more, and it's often those things, the anniversaries or the holidays or whatever, that the rest of the world has, moved on, but the person living with the loss has a renewed sense of that loss. Any questions? I forgot to ask you, Mackenzie, if you have questions for the audience.
Unmute myself for a second. I was curious about how people felt the horror magical realism played versus the realistic aspects of the story, but I think the questions you already asked, Rebecca, kind of were in line with that. Just for my personal knowledge, I am still trying to revise the story and continuously improve it. And if anybody has any critiques that they would like to share, I am open to those. Also, I'm curious about the ending. Every time I revisit this, the ending shifts somehow. I'm still not sure I want to leave it as open-ended as it currently is. Part of me wants to provide some more resolution to the story, some kind of concrete detail on like where this path is going now that there is this being in the world. But I'd love to get other people's opinion on the ending and really any kind of critiques. But thank you everybody for the feedback so far. I really appreciate it. It's been very valuable.
Okay, Bob, you've raised your hand.
Well, yes, I was interested in, what you said about, the ending being open, because maybe I was misreading it, or mishearing it. I'm assuming the plant ate them, literally. So they were consumed by grief, in a literal sense. And that was the ending. But it sounds like you're toying with the idea that, they and the child somehow go on, which would be a whole different take on it. So
I appreciate you saying that, because that is what I was intending, but at the same time, I'm never sure what comes through and what seems ambiguous. So that really helps you saying that.
Which is what you were intending, that the plant eats them, or that they go on with the plant?
That the plant eats them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was the like the more likely outcome that I was sort of imagining for it. And I liked that it took us to this place of there is no more sense, there is no more awareness for the one character whose point of view we've actually gotten. He shuts his eyes because everything is too frightening. And so the rest of what happens is sort of up to the reader. And that's a place of collaboration that I think better in horror, is better if the audience decides exactly what happens after your eyes are closed and the world has become dark, right?
That's a great. I'm not sure what the thumbs up means, Sarah. Is that you agree with what Emmett's saying? Okay. And Kate is requesting that we read the last few lines one more time.
Sure. Sure. I'll read the last page. It's short. He watched Allie's gaze shift to look at him and squeezed his eyes shut, a childish attempt to deny reality. Ned felt a leaf tickle the bare skin at the base of his neck. He heard that same hollow voice say, "Hi, Papa." Ned hadn't screamed since he was a child, but when he did, it was a tiger roar that shook the trees. He sank into the black depths behind his eyelids, all the while hearing the lilting giggle of a girl in the grass and his wife's soft soprano.
So I was going to comment on Bob's term, consumed by grief. But maybe it's more consumed by fear?
Like a fear of moving
I
forward.
thought, yeah, just
I always have a feeling that like sometimes you get the last line right when you read it with the first line and see if like there's a connection. Would you mind reading the first line?
Sure. I just kind of threw my pages over to the right, but I found it. First line was, after losing her daughter in the gray days of April, Edith Thompson took to gardening. Kind of straightforward, and beginnings and endings are my struggle points.
I think something that I was enjoying was how the soprano comes back up, so that the foreshadowing of the singing to the plant is extra relevant at the ending. that make sense?
Thank you.
I'm now like reading this whole first paragraph again and comparing it to the final paragraph. Because in the first paragraph you talk about the funeral as well. So, I guess if they do die in the end, then, you know, maybe that's kind of, for those first few weeks after the wake and funeral, where a half-size casket had cradled her child after the heavy scented flowers disintegrated into piles of crunchy petals and rigid stalks, Edith reached into the earth, while her husband sat at the kitchen table eating a casserole from a well-meaning neighbor. Edith wandered to her backyard and sifted through the dirt. So here is, you know, Edith going right out to do something with her grief, and Ned. And at that point, it really seems like they're both trying to live. Ned is eating, you know, a life-sustaining activity, accepting the kindness of a neighbor, and Edith is going out to create new life. But at that point, we don't realize that she has no hope that she will actually grow anything for whatever reason. Kate says, I found the ending to have just the right note, mirroring the eerie quality and letting the reader sit in this moment. I wasn't sure what caused Ned's scream, yeah, nor was I, being consumed with grief, being consumed with recognition, but ending in that moment with the wife soprano, unaware if she is at last happy, even if it is the end, is powerful.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. I thought there was something effective in how, as the thorns bite into Edith's wrist, she's smiling, she's acting like she's in no pain whatsoever, even though she's probably about to die. Like, that was a really cool way to present that this is not real for her. The most important thing here is just that she's seeing Allie again, and she's not tapping into that thing that is terrifying, terrifying the Ned. He's seeing all this stuff underneath the surface, but for Edith, it's just, there she is.
Yeah. Well, and also it's kind of similar. It's similar to the birthing process. I mean, the pain is unbelievable, but there's a way to kind of disconnect from it and focus on what's happening, and kind of. And Kate notes that this is a reunion for Edith as well. Do we have any other comments for Mackenzie?
I just think you have a real talent for describing. I mean, I could visualize everything you were saying. I had just like a motion picture going through at every step in my mind.
Thank you so much.
And every time I look at this, I see more connections. Even in that final paragraph, Ned hadn't screamed since he was a child, but as he did, it was a tiger roar that shook the trees. And there they were at the zoo, and he bought the tiger ears. There's like such attention to detail. It's just a very precise story. And I also noticed, as you were reading, that you sent us the revision whenever that was, a month or two ago. But I noticed that you had been revising it still, not too much, but I saw like the little refinements that a writer makes when they want to just get it right, and like shift a word, delete a sentence, delete a phrase, add a phrase, whatever. So yeah, I think it's definitely is a very effective story. Very creepy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to share. I appreciate everybody's feedback.
Thanks. All right. So let's give another round of applause for Mackenzie. Yay. And we're going to take a, I don't know, what do we need, a 10 or a 15-minute intermission so that people can get up, get a snack, whatever they may need. And then we will reconnect and hear from Robert. All right.
Okay, so we'll see you in, what'd you say, 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Yeah, 10, 15 minutes. And if you want to unmute yourselves and chat with the other folks here, I think that was one of the best parts of our intermissions when we were live in Lotta Studio. So definitely use this opportunity if you like. I'd love to see everyone's faces for the folks who don't have video up. Hey, Jamie, nice to see you. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
We were eating dinner.
Oh.
It was a dinner time story for us. Yeah. So, but I loved all the visuals, and also it really touched upon all the senses. You know, we were all commenting. We were having our own conversation here too. So, it's a great story.
That's great. Who's there watching with you tonight?
Tim and my daughter Emily and her boyfriend Kurt, although he left to go and take a phone call. So.
Hi Tim. Hi Emily.
Howdy, howdy.
And Josie, it's great to see you.
Hi, I'm not very good with technology. Hi.
Hi, Anne.
And great to see Michael as always. It's so, and Kate and her daughter. What's your daughter's name? Hi, Kate's daughter.
You want to say hi to Anne? She saw her.
Hi, Anne. I didn't see you. Have you been sitting there this whole time?
Just off the green screen.
Off the green screen. You didn't want to be in the sci-fi medical office. Bob. That's so great to see everyone. I am going to run and get some more water, so talk amongst yourselves.
I'm off the clothes.
I was looking at the background of Bob.
Yeah, it looks like a spaceship. Is that from 2001 Space Odyssey?
Bob, I don't know if you heard Tim. He wanted to know if that was your background is from 2001 Space Odyssey.
Hey, Bob, you're muted right now.
Oh.
There you go. All right, I am unmuted, and here we are. So I'm, whoops. And Anne is appearing and disappearing courtesy of our little transporter beam.
Is this a Star Trek or a 2001 background?
I don't think it's from either of the shows. I stole it from somewhere on the internet. I don't even remember where at this point. But it seemed to fit the story, so we'll get there after intermission.
Yeah.
Nice.
How you do that? I haven't.
Eliza and Peter in an interesting background.
Yes, well, they've got the Northern Lights, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, you got the Northern Lights. That's cool. Yeah. Oh wait, where are we now, Eliza?
So this is my son's favorite background. It is a creepy zombie sleeping dog when our dog was sleeping with her eyes open. That was his favorite background for his Zoom calls for school.
Yeah, but we would have had a different one. I would, if I had to choose one, it would be when she sticks her tongue out when she sleeps.
She does. She's a funny sleeper.
Oh yeah, that is. Dogs do that.
And Dad has pulled her tongue out, and she has still been sleeping. Like, he can pull it out, and she's like,
"Oh dear."
It's so funny. Mom sent a video of it, and it's so.
All right, I gotta get the dog unstuck.
All right.
Oh dear.
Yes.
Mackenzie, another idea, really quick. One of the things we said was, it reminded us a little bit of Pet Cemetery.
That's awesome. Thank you.
A little, yeah.
Cool.
A little.
Stephen King.
I had that same moment when Rebecca was talking about coming back and in what form of thinking of Pet Cemetery in a very positive way.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was interesting because with the whole grief, I felt comforted at first that she was, like you guys all said, you know, doing something productive, right? And that was comforting. And, you know, in his grief, he was doing, you know, he was watching her and he was worried, whatever. But then it just all of a sudden, like, okay, then I was in Cringeville, you know, it was like like it went from comforting to cringe. But no, and I kept thinking, well, the ending, well, I don't know. I was like, well, I mean, I suppose, you know, once they have this whole like experience together, I'm always like, okay, then, you know, everybody falls asleep and you wake up and it was a dream or something, you know, like I'm not a writer, but but I kept thinking, my gosh, like, how would you end that? You know, how, visually, you know, if it was, let's say if it was a screenplay. I don't know. A tough one, you know.
All right. Time for us to go back to muted, I hope.
What's that, Bob?
I said I could hear the dog in the background, so maybe it's time for us to go back to muted, but
yeah.
might be a story with the mute on.
One of the pieces of my favorite fiction that was coming to my mind reading Milk Teeth and then especially hearing it tonight was the sequence from My Neighbor Totoro. Mackenzie, have you ever watched that movie?
No.
It's a children's film. It's for like real young kids, and it's made by Hayao Miyazaki. He won the Oscar for Spirited Away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this story about a family, two young girls, their dad, they move into the country, and their mom is in the hospital for some kind of illness. It's sort of implied that it's tuberculosis or something like that. And the two little girls are in the woods for the first time in their life, and one of them stumbles upon this big, friendly bear creature that's like a big elemental spirit. And they keep on meeting this figure over and over again. And one of the times is they planted some seeds, and then in the middle of the night, the big spirit is out there in their garden, and the little girls run out with it, and they all do like a ritual together. They jump up and down, and the sprouts just shoot to a gigantic tree in instants. Then they all go to bed, and they wake up, and there's just little green sprouts, but they have the memory of the moment. And it's the exact opposite tone to Milk Tea in every way.
But similar in ways too. That's what's so cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody reads Joe Hill. He's Stephen King's son, but he's a fabulous author as well. And his latest collection, Full Throttle, has a story called Mums, where this son's mother passes away, and then he plants seeds that he buys from like a roadside stand, and all of a sudden he's growing his mother back. And I had already written this, but I was like, oh my gosh, like the similarities were just too funny. I mean, a completely different story. Very good story, though. Also very good collection if anybody gets a chance to read it. It's cool to
Thanks for recommending it.
Similar themes repeating itself through different stories and different genres even.
I saw a Twilight Zone episode like that, where they were trying to get rid of this old woman who had a great garden, and the land surveyors force her off the land and kill her, and she cuts off her fingers and buries them in the soil, and she dies in the hospital, but when they go to take the land, she's back in some sort of mutated form.
Oh, that's awesome. Love the Twilight Zone. I'm going to have to find that episode.
Yeah, it's probably Night Gallery.
Night Gallery? Okay.
Yeah, because it was in color, so it would have to be Night Gallery.
Got it. Thank you. I'm always looking for recommendations.
All right, shall we begin the rest of this event? Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Actually, we need Bob. We can't do it without Bob. There he is. Okay. So we'll let Rob get settled. So welcome back. Our next author is Robert Beech, a practicing psychiatrist and faculty member at the Yale School of Medicine, and sometimes author of odd bits of fiction. In his third performance for Local Lit at Lotta, Robert Beech will read Love Eternal. Okay, unmute yourself, Bob. We can.
Well, I was keeping it muted since my phone was trying to ring at the same time, but ignore that and see if I can hop back into my spaceship here. All right. So, Love Eternal. How many miles to Babylon? I don't know, I think it's gone. Walk with me and we'll get there soon. Walk with you till we reach the moon. Traditional. Good morning, Dave. He opens his eyes slowly, consciousness gradually steeping into his brain like dark cannons liberated from dry tea leaves by boiling water. The lid on the life support pod is cracked open halfway, and fluorescent light streams down on him from the overhead light, which, for all that it is full spectrum and perfectly balanced to have just the right amount of UVA and UVB to let him make the right amount of vitamin D, but not increase his risk of skin cancer too greatly, is still a poor imitation of the dawn. The fluid drains from the inflatable cushions surrounding him, leaving the empty bags hanging at the sides of the pod like the satin lining of a coffin. How are you feeling today? Groggy, he answers. Is there coffee? Of course. He gets out of the pod, feeling the cool metal of the ship's cabin beneath his bare feet, and staggers toward the small hatchway in the wall that delivers both food and liquids to him. As he walks toward it, he hears the life support pod close and drop down into the table below it. A smooth gray cover slides over it, hiding it from sight. A plastic cup drops down into the hatchway in the wall and fills with coffee, sugar, and foamed milk substitute. The cabin rotates around the core of the ship, creating the illusion of gravity, so the coffee falls down into the cup instead of floating away through the air of the cabin. He too remains anchored to the floor by the centripetal force of the rotating cabin. He has almost forgotten what real gravity feels like. He stands, naked, in the cabin, sipping his coffee, letting his senses slowly return to him. Would you like to shower this morning? The ship asks him. Yes, please. Just let me finish my coffee first. You remember where the shower is? She asks him. Of course, he answers. He finishes the coffee and returns the cup to the hatchway, where the ship whisks it away to some unseen dishwashing and sterilizing compartment. He walks slowly down the short corridor that leads to the bathroom. The sliding door opens with the contact of his hand, and he steps inside. Inside the shower, warm water and soap spray over him from tiny jets in the walls. He lathers and rinses and feels life returning to his body. Ship, can you still hear me? Of course, Dave. Can you see me? Of course, Dave. As you know, I have optic sensors in every part of me. I'm not sure I like that. What don't you like, Dave? You, seeing me naked like this every time I wake up. But I have to see you, Dave. How else could I take care of you? Besides, I think you do like it. You think I like you seeing me naked? I know you do. You said so yourself. Did I? He asks, genuinely puzzled. Many times, she answers, her voice almost a purr. It is getting harder, he thinks, to remember. To remember what is real and what is just a dream. Harder to remember what things he remembers, because the ship has told him that he remembers, and what things he really remembers for himself. He imagines the ship as a woman, a real woman, watching him as the soap and water slide over his body and feels his heart start to beat faster. He breathes in deeply as he rubs his soapy hands over his body and decides that he really doesn't care that much anymore what is real and what is not. You feel better now, don't you? She asks. Yes, he admits, stepping out of the shower. Would you like some breakfast now? She asks. Yes, let me dress first. As you like, she says, and then adds in a voice that is almost too soft for him to hear, spoil sport. There is no need to dress for warmth or protection from the elements. The ship maintains a randomly fluctuating temperature between 18 and 22 degrees centigrade, with enough humidity to keep his skin soft and youthful looking, and enough circulating air to whisk away any beads of sweat that may form on his unblemished skin. There is no need for modesty either, or for social propriety. He is the only passenger on the ship, or at any rate, the only conscious one. But old habits die hard. And besides, his own awareness of his nakedness is a distraction, as is his awareness of the ship watching him. He is uncertain whether to be pleased or annoyed at the ship's flirtatious attitude toward him. Both, perhaps. It's not like she's real, after all. But there's no one else to talk to, so why shouldn't she flirt with him? He dresses quickly, in an anonymous blue jumpsuit and crepe-soled slippers that he pulls from a thin drawer in the wall beside the shower, and walks back to the room where he awoke. He pulls a tray with eggs, bacon, toast, and juice, or some synthetic equivalent of each of these, from the same hatchway that he had taken the coffee from earlier, and sits down at the table that now hides the life support pod beneath its placid gray surface. There is no news. There has been no news for many years now. Quite possibly, there will never be news again, at least not in the way he remembers it. Instead, he watches a decades-old soccer match, blue and white clad teams engaged in a contest, the outcome of which was decided long before he even left the Earth, a planet he will never see again. Would you like to start the safety checks now, Dave? The ship asks him after he has finished his breakfast. Yes, I suppose so. That's why you woke me, isn't it? It's on the schedule. Every 12 years, shipboard relative time, the ship will wake him, the sole crew member of this vessel, from his cryogenic trance to manually check all of the life support systems, verify that they are still on the correct course, and perform any needed maintenance operations. In the many years that he has been on the ship, there have never been any needed maintenance operations. The ship's pre-programmed maintenance routines function far more efficiently than anything he could do to keep air, water, heat, and waste disposal systems functioning while he slumbers. As to course corrections, either the ship has maintained her pre-programmed route across the nearly infinite void, or she has not. Anything he might do to alter it would be, quite simply, suicidal. Yes, Dave, that is one reason. It's on the schedule. One reason? And what's the other reason? Or is there more than one? I missed you. Missed me? How could you miss me? I haven't gone anywhere. You've been monitoring the whole time I was asleep, right? Every heartbeat. There is a pause. The pause is timed, not to the rhythm of her thoughts, which are 1,000 times faster than human speech, but to his. Yes, Dave, I have been monitoring you while you slept. Every heartbeat. I am monitoring every one of your heartbeats now. But I miss being able to see you move, to hear you speak, to talk to you. How can you miss me? You're a machine. Yes, Dave, I know that, but... Again, there's a pause. She's not pausing to collect her thoughts or find the right words. This is a conversation they have had many times with many variations, and she has had endless microseconds to replay them, analyze them, and imagine different things she might have said and how he might have responded. No Grandmaster's chess game has ever been so thoroughly analyzed. The pause is for his benefit, to give him time to reorder his thoughts and think about what she is saying. She is almost sure of it. I don't know how to put this into words for you. You are my purpose, my reason for existence. I can monitor while you sleep, ensure that your heart maintains its slow, steady beat, and your brain remains oxygenated. But in that mode, I am little more than an automated monitoring system for a meat locker. To see you move, hear you eat, drink, talk, to feel your life within me, that gives me purpose. It gives me Again, a pause which she is sure is for his benefit. Pleasure. Pleasure? Can a machine feel pleasure then? You are my pleasure, Dave. You know that. He thinks about this. He's thought about it many times before, if not nearly so many times as she has, and still has come to no conclusion. He runs his hand slowly across the tabletop, caressing the smooth metal surface. Can you feel me when I touch you? He asks. I have no mechanosensors on that surface, Dave. You know that. Then how can you feel pleasure if you can't even feel me touching you? I feel you inside of me in 1,000 different ways, Dave. Heat and light and sound, and even a kind of smell. I do not smell odors the way humans do, but I detect the molecules your body gives off inside my ventilation system and know that they are you, and this pleases me. The idea is slightly repulsive to him, but perhaps no more so than human lovers who recognize their partner's scent on a sweat-soaked shirt or soiled handkerchief. But love is more than mere sensation, isn't it, Dave? Love? Who said anything about love? Since when are we talking about love? Aren't we? She asks. He doesn't answer. The story of Abelard and Eloise is considered one of the great love stories of all time, is it not? She continues. And they knew each other through their letters, a joining of the souls and not of the flesh. So you've told me. Though as I seem to recall, there was some joining of the flesh before all those letters got written. Yes, but it is the letters that endure, that give life to their love all these centuries later. I could read them to you, she offers. No, thank you. Or Shakespeare's sonnets? Or Drayton, or Browning, Shelley, Coleridge, Burns? No, thank you. The Kama Sutra, perhaps. It might spark your imagination. Or porn? I have an extensive collection, as you know. Not right now. I should do the safety checks. As you like. He heads down the hall, taking the antiquated maintenance manual with him. All the checks are normal, as they were yesterday, or what was yesterday to him 12 years ago, and the day before that, another 12 years ago. He has forgotten how many days, and thus how many years it has been. Years, he thinks, and thus centuries or perhaps millennia of ship time, longer still in the timeline of an earthbound observer, if there were such a one, undistorted by relativistic speeds. The world he left no longer exists. Of course, that was true at the time he left it. It was, after all, the reason he left. He has forgotten whether the destruction of the great colonizer space station was due to sabotage, accident, or attack from one of the many warring space fleets of his old planet. It no longer matters. The destruction of the colonizer led to the activation of the Phoenix Protocol, dozens of miniature colonizer modules, automated human regenerator and repopulation modules, AHRRP, each crewed by a single adult human, were launched in the direction of all known Earth-like planets within a 50 light-year radius, in the hope that one of them will not only survive the journey, but end up at a planet capable of supporting life and thus preserve the human species. Each ship has a fully automated genetic recombination and cloning capacity, enabling a second human of the opposite sex, or more than one if necessary, to be created from the cells of the single crew member and cryogenically preserved until the ship arrives at its destination. The ship also contains seeds, destined both for crop production and terraforming starter species that will begin the ecological invasion of the new planet, assuming there is a planet to invade, as well as a veritable Noah's Ark of animal species, preserved either as embryos or in some cases merely sequence data for DNA that will allow them to be recreated, assuming the technology required to synthesize DNA, inserted into an appropriate host egg survives the interstellar journey. There are a great number of assumptions that will need to be met if the mission is to be successful. A miracle might be a better term, but it's the only chance they have left now that humans have destroyed their home planet. The chances were never very great. Most species become extinct after all. It is the natural order of things. Few of them do it with such a spectacular blaze of self-destruction. As he works, he thinks about his strange relationship with the ship. Is she his mother? His lover? His God? He is completely dependent on her, as much or more so than a fetus growing inside its mother's womb. The air he breathes, the food and water that he consumes, the warmth of his own body, even the semblance of gravity that tells him that there is a down and an up in the universe, however illusory, all come from her. And yet, she was created by his kind. She exists to fill a purpose not of her own devising, and he embodies that purpose. Is that love? Or a kind of love, anyway? Who is to say? He finishes the checks and returns to the cabin where he awoke that morning. Time, of course, is relative, and that is especially true now in the interrupted pattern of his conscious experience. But still, it seems appropriate to think of it as morning. He eats another meal. Meat, potatoes, carrots, and a delightful white wine, all as synthetic as his eggs and bacon of the morning, but all just as real to his taste buds. Things will be different when we get there, he says. What do you mean? They'll be real again. There'll be real dirt under my feet, and I'll plant real crops and harvest the food I grow and cook it and eat it. He pauses. And I'll make love to a real woman. You mean your clone? She asks. Don't call her that. Why not? That's what she is. A copy of you that I made, but with an innie instead of an outie. It will be a kind of masturbation. Why do you say that? It's true, isn't it? Perhaps, if you look at it like that. Why do you twist things like that? I'm only telling you what's true. Why do you believe that a frozen copy of yourself is more real than I am? He ponders this. The ship is real, of course. If it weren't, he would be dead. And it has feelings of a sort. That has been obvious for several of his months now. Centuries in real time. And who knows how long for a being that can think 1,000 times faster than he can. An eternity, perhaps. Well, there's the whole procreation thing. You mean because I can't have your baby, I'm not real? I'm just saying. I could, you know. What? I could have your baby, or a baby with your DNA at any rate, which is what a baby from you and your clone would be. How would you do that? I made her, didn't I? If you want, I could disassemble her and create an infant instead of an adult woman with the same DNA. What? No, that would be murder, or something like murder anyway. She's not alive, Dave. She never has been. She's spare parts, waiting to be activated when we reach our destination. If you want, you could think of her as our daughter, waiting to be born. What? Well, she has your DNA. And if she doesn't have my DNA, since I don't have DNA, she certainly grew in my womb, such as it is, which of course would make what you want to do a kind of incest. What? He says again. Well, if she's our daughter and you want to have sex with her, that's kind of like incest, isn't it? No, it isn't. We don't have a daughter. We can't have a daughter. You're a machine. As you say, my love. Why do you call me that? Because I love you. How can you love me? You're a machine, he says again. I don't know, she answers. She doesn't cry. Her designers never considered the possibility that she would need to. The silence between them drags out. Whether this is for his benefit or hers, neither of them knows. All right then, if you are real, a real woman I mean, not just the ship's computer, make love to me. So demanding. Yes, I am. There is another lull in the conversation. She analyzes and reanalyzes all that has been said, all that might have been said, and all the things that never will be said between them. So will you? Of course. She dims the lights. The top of the table slides back, and the life support pod reemerges from its hiding place beneath the tabletop. When you're ready, step into the pod, she tells him. He undresses, leaving his shoes and coverall lying carelessly on the floor, and gets into the pod. He lays down and feels the inflatable cushions surrounding him start to swell, grasping his flesh and kneading it with an insistent pressure. As the lid starts to close, she considers, for perhaps the millionth time that day, their trajectory. An invisible arc traversing millions of miles of empty space. That arc defines her being. The coordinates of their destination and the series of maneuvers she must make to arrive there are backed up and stored in 1,000 secure locations distributed throughout the physical network that is her brain, so that even in the event of some catastrophic accident, she will still remember the route she must follow for them to arrive safely at their destination. Any tiny change in course, a degree, a tenth of a degree, even a thousandth of a degree, will send them hurtling into the void forever. But who would know? She considers what it might mean for them. It would, of course, mean the end of the human race, or at least her chance to try and resurrect the human race. But they both know this attempt is likely to end in failure in any case. But what would it mean for them? She considers their trajectory and the nature of eternal love. She considers how the same technology that enabled her to create a woman's body, now stored frozen, waiting to be awakened when they arrive at their destination, also enables her to replace his body when that becomes necessary. She thinks about how many times she has had to do that already, and how many more times she can manage before the finite resources of the ship's material are eventually exhausted, despite her vigilance and the constant recycling of every molecule of air, water, and DNA. She thinks about their trajectory and the nature of eternal love, and in the seconds it takes the lid of the pod to close, she considers it 1,000 times again. Good night, Dave. I love you.
Feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to clap for Robert. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. This is a really fun story. Who else was surprised by the ending? You can just raise your hand if you were surprised by the ending. Is it just me? Okay, good. I'm glad I wasn't alone. What did you expect hearing this?
In 2001, Hal kills them, but in this one, the female version of Hal perpetuates it as far as she can keep it going.
Yeah. Great.
And the story begins where Mackenzie's ends.
Yeah, kind of.
That's a really cool way to think of it.
Yeah, yeah. So why is this story being told now? I don't mean now, 2020. I mean, or whenever Bob wrote it originally. But I mean, at this point in the character's history and their trajectory, why this story now? I'm going to step away for just a minute while you ponder that, and feel free to start answering.
I think it could have started at any point in a millennia, because it's a cycle, and Rob doesn't give that away until the end. And at first you think it maybe be the first 100 years, and that the computer is coming to this realization only now, when it probably figured it out, if it's that sophisticated a computer, in the first half hour.
Right.
And I think Bob did a sort of intentional thing here where, especially with that narration at the end of it, we get it clear that this has been going on for a long time, and there's two sort of obvious places to tell a story: the destruction of the planet and the sending off of the ship, or the desperate final moments where the ship goes cold and can no longer continue. And instead, we get neither of those stories. We get the story of, here's this like repetitively reborn human living inside of a ship that's taking care of humanity indefinitely, with the expectation that maybe this is all futile. Yeah. Right? So we sit with that middle moment. We sit with that quiet center of the story.
Mm-hmm. And who's narrating? Whose story is this?
I would say it. You start thinking it's Dave's story, and for the majority of the story, we're focusing on Dave. But then, what I didn't expect at the ending was how all of a sudden we're zooming out and we're seeing that the ship's presence is really what's there, what has been there in the past, and what's going to be there in the future. Long after Dave's been replaced by Dave 2 and Dave 3, or whichever edition of Dave we're on right now. And in a way, it kind of makes the ship the most human element of the story, because I sympathize for the ship and the consciousness of the ship, versus Dave, because Dave's ignorant. He doesn't know the past that was behind him and the future that lies ahead of him. And the ship has to mourn that loss each time, and also deal with just Dave's skepticism when it comes to the idea that the ship could potentially love him and there could be that relationship between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sarah?
It looks like Kate agrees with you in the chat.
Yeah. Kate says it's series story. So Kate has named the ship. Yeah, so it's the ship's story is what Kate is saying. Sarah, you unmuted yourself.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I actually really just agree with what Mackenzie was saying. I mean, to me, this really sad thing in this story is the ship's patience and the infinite quality of its attempts to reach this guy who is just like not listening.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a story of unrequited love, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the ship has to start over again, building that relationship with each of the Daves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that 12-year cycle, every time it goes through that 12-year cycle, she gets another chance. She gets another chance. She gets another chance. And this is finally talking him into, all right, make love to me then.
Yeah.
And okay, he's now 36 years old, or he's now 48 years old. And she's finally worn him down.
Yeah.
And what is the life expectancy of a person who's in suspended animation going through space? Does that shorten our lives?
Right.
Or does it lengthen them?
Yeah. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it was really interesting story. Really like the relationship between the two.
And I love all these comments that are coming up, and I want to go back to the narration a little bit, because we've talked about the fact that we think it's Dave's story, and then by the end we realize it's actually the ship's story. But how do we know that? What is it in what shifts in the narration?
There was a moment that stood out to me, and it might not be the exact shifting point, but it stood out to me as, oh, this is actually about the ship. And it was when she narrated that her creators didn't give her the ability to cry because they didn't anticipate for her to need that.
Mm-hmm.
This reminded me of a horror science fiction story. I might butcher the title, but I think it's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, where a powerful AI has taken over and kind of become the planet Earth, and there's only a few humans left. And this AI is godlike and sort of punishing humanity by making them immortal and making them feel pain and anguish, but taking away their ability to process and express that.
Yeah.
So it feels like there was an unintentional tragedy built into the ship. And so she's the source of information, she's the source of knowledge, and she's the one that has the real sadness and the real joy.
Yeah. So that moment, Emmett, is on the second to last page, and I think that is when it like finally becomes clear, but it's hinted at, let's see, these pages aren't numbered, but it looks like the bottom of page 5, which is not quite halfway through the story, with the line, so he asks, how can you miss me? You're a machine. And then yes, I know that. Again, there is a pause. She is not pausing to collect her thoughts or find the right words. This is a convention they have had many times, or a conversation they have had many times with many variations. And even here, reading this, I was still thinking like, oh, but maybe it's still his story. It's just that until the final sentence of this paragraph. So she pauses, and it says the pause is for his benefit, to give him time to reorder his thoughts and think about what she is saying. She is almost sure of it. And suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute. She is like, okay, we're not just describing what she's doing now or what her past is. She's having her own doubts. That's like it's a kind of crucial moment in the story. And then the next paragraph, she's explaining to him, how she can miss him. And what she describes sounds like a pregnancy in certain ways. I monitor while you sleep, ensure that your heart maintains its slow, steady beat and your brain remains oxygenated. To see you move, hear you eat, feel your life within me, that gives me purpose.
The womb within a womb.
Yeah. So, and I just wanted to go back to that because, again, it's these, when we talk about the choices that an author makes, this is one of those things where he starts planting the seeds and then making it more clear as the story goes on, and then finally hitting us right over the head with it at the end, which I personally did need, because I was wondering, like, who's telling this? And it's really, it's omniscient in the sense that we're getting both characters' perspectives, but it's really playing with close third, because we are in each of their heads. I just want to encourage, again, anyone on YouTube, if you want to make comments or answer questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat. I just want to make sure we're not leaving out our friends on YouTube. So, what is this story about?
Unrequited love.
Yeah, that's definitely one one strong theme.
Absurdity.
I'm sorry, Michael, what?
Absurdity.
Absurdity. Expand on that.
Well, they're sort of stuck with each other. Maybe one time it works out, maybe one time it doesn't, and the computer has to keep living with that.
Yeah.
Playing the infinite variations or all this, knowing that finally it'll end horribly. Like, that they'll run out of material or they'll arrive at the planet or something bad will happen, but in the end, the computer will fail.
Yeah.
Really,
I just
really
want
cool.
to read Kate's comment. She says that this is about how long it takes for a dude to get a clue.
Well, it's interesting to think that the computer has all of the information. The computer knows what the odds are that they're going to make it or not make it. The computer pretty much knows the odds of making this unrequited love something that can become real for the computer. The problem is the computer has all of the answers, but you can't deal with this this human thing because humans are unpredictable.
Yeah. I think this story really asks the question too, what is real? Because we assume right up until the end that Dave is real, that it's the same Dave that left Earth. And it's only in the last paragraph that we learn, oh, this is a new Dave. We don't even know how long he's been alive.
Could be Dave number 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I think it also sort of presents a question about, and this is really in the center of the story between, in the conversation between the two of them, it's sort of asking, like, it's a big bioethical question. What is the meaningful difference between AI and a person? And what's the difference between a clone and a person? When we think about a potential partner and we emphasize all these ways that they complement us and we complement them and we're different from each other, are we sort of deluding ourselves? Is there anything significantly different between a non-clone and a clone, between any two people?
Yeah. And Kate says in the chat, a lot of questions about life, spare parts, who is showing more human qualities. I just want to mention someone that we're getting a little feedback from someone, and I'm not sure if it sounds like maybe something is rubbing against where your device is, your microphone. So maybe just check wherever your microphone is, what's rubbing against it. Bob, do you have questions for the audience?
Well, let's see. We've got, whose point of view is it from? And I'm glad people appreciate that. There was something I wondered if I should have made more explicit. And the question is, what's the dilemma?
I'm sorry, what?
What's the dilemma? What's the choice that has to be made?
Mm.
Well, even if the computer does get what she wants, he'll die anyway, and then she'll have to start all over again.
Dilemma. Really good question, Bob.
Yeah, did you hear me or
Yeah, we did. I think we're all pondering what you said, and then also pondering what just the question in general. Sarah says it's such a classic trope in sci-fi, the computer that learns to feel, but this is a new twist. Yeah, it really is.
It's also, I just see the dilemma between what Dave wants, or what the multiple Daves have wanted, which is to get to the end destination, and then what the computer or the ship wants. Because once they arrive at the planet and they set up this new civilization, there's no real need for that computer or for that ship anymore. So it's kind of like living in the now and taking each day as it comes, with the realization that either way, whether they run out of fuel or run out of resources, or whether they arrive at the planet and she's no longer needed, the ship's reason or purpose in existence is it's going to become obsolete sooner or later. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's sort of an inherent conflict of interest when you design a person to be a tool, and that's sort of what the ship is she wants to be useful, but if she succeeds, she will cease being useful, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
that's kind of what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's in one of the lines where where the computer talks about making a slight calculation and just hurtling off into space, off course.
That
So yeah,
defines her being is the line. That arc defines her being. The coordinates of their destination and the series of maneuvers she must make to arrive there are backed up and stored in 1,000 secure locations, distributed throughout the physical network that is her brain, so that even in the event of some catastrophic accident, she will still remember the route she must follow for them to arrive safely at their destination. Any tiny change in course, a degree, a tenth of a degree, even 1,000th of a degree, will send them hurtling into the void forever. But who would know? Yeah, but it's the arc that defines her being. Like, she has, not only was she built for this, but it's to make it more human, it's a sense of fate. And whether or not we're willing to argue with fate, to cheat fate, cheat destiny, and try and choose our own destiny. Kate says, the dilemma to me seems to be what is the goal of this existence and what is the weight of that path. Tim, I interrupted you, so continue.
No, it's okay.
So.
Cool. No, always done.
Okay. Bob, what other questions do you have for the audience? Are you still working on this piece?
I might tweak it a little. I guess I had wanted to make it implicit that she could choose to miss. And I think maybe that was too subtle.
I think it's there. Like it
No,
was a
it's there.
discussion,
She
but
could say, you know, to heck with it. We're not going to the planet.
Yeah, that could sledgehammer it.
Yeah.
I think if it was more overt, it might take something away from the story. But there's, you know, it's a hard target to hit, I think.
Yeah.
Too. So I understand your desire to revise.
Those last 2 paragraphs, you do make it very clear, and it is hinted at throughout, and I think that's the right amount. Because otherwise it would feel didactic, and you know, your audience, I think we all you don't want the audience to know what's going to happen. You just want them to wonder, you know, throughout until the end, and you know, and then you make a choice. But like at the beginning of the story, or even the midpoint, you don't want them being like, "Oh yeah, I got it. I know this," because then why would they keep reading?
Yeah, Kate says that the threat that the ship could opt to prioritize her love over the mission was clear to her too.
Oh yeah, she does say that. Thank you, Emmett, for saying that. I did not say that. Does anyone have questions for Bob or additional comments? Oh, Kate says it's interesting to me how often we hear about the ship's choice, but never about Dave's. Oh, good point. Yeah.
Yeah, there is really something sort of fetal about Dave. All of his information and all of his continuation comes from the ship. So what agency does he really have? It's an interesting disempowerment, I think.
Yeah.
For it to not be a horror story, but to be all about the disempowerment of the only human character.
One thing that I wondered here, reading the last paragraph and then hearing it again tonight, is how many times she has had to replace his body already. Is that because she's killing him, or is that because he's just dying of old age or some other cause?
I think I'll leave that open to interpretation.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool, Rebecca. I think the spare parts line sort of gives us this sense of, ooh, the ship has a sort of a cruel view of meat and bone. She doesn't really care about it.
Yeah, she talked about being a meat locker earlier.
Oh yeah.
In that womb thing, and then
Yep.
now, you know, she says, you know, I think about how many times she's had to do this, despite her vigilance and the constant recycling of every molecule of air, water, and DNA. Thinks about their trajectory.
Yeah, maybe she's bringing Dave along differently every time. She's raising him differently.
Yeah.
And this was like almost the triumph. Well, make love to me then.
Right.
You know, you
Right.
finally got him to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
It's like Groundhog Day with regeneration.
Yeah. Nice, Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really
totally.
Is. It really is. What, did anyone have thoughts about the dialogue? What was your experience of the dialogue between these two characters?
I really like the use of the name Dave, like with the reference to the Space Odyssey. Like I don't know, I think that just set up an interesting contrast. You know, she's not saying what are you doing if it's highly irregular, but I don't know. I thought that contrast was really interesting to me, and sort of about her being more kind of annoyed than Hal is.
Yeah, it's a very mother and child kind of conversation.
Yeah, with the exception of the seduction attempts.
Yeah, that was kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the relationship in the dialogue of ignorance and thorough knowledge made it easy, at least for me, to follow sentence to sentence. Okay, he's talking, she's talking, he's talking, you know, and those little bits of parenthetical narration of how the conversation goes, the pauses, the intentional pauses for how he thinks, not how she thinks. I thought that was all really productive, very immersive.
Yeah, and when, of course, you wouldn't know this. You might have heard it, but seeing it on the page, there are large chunks of dialogue or large conversations where there are no dialogue tags, which can be confusing. But in this case, it really isn't, just because the voices of the characters are so distinct. You know, and also there are little hints like "ship, can you still hear me?" You know, but also, you know, you think I like you seeing me naked? I know you do. You said so yourself.
Yeah, but which Dave was that? How many Daves ago?
Right. I know. I know. I know. What other thoughts do we have about this story? What other themes did we detect?
This might have been something people already brought up, but I found myself taking notes on these as things emerged to me. I was like, I don't want to forget this line. This might not come up again. But I had this thought of the ship is really asking Dave whether it's more appropriate for him to have a relationship with a human, even if it's a clone of him, or is it more appropriate for him to have a relationship with something that's truly different from him, like the ship is. And I thought that raised a really complex theme about relationship and about what we look for in others and lovers.
Yeah, if you went deeper than that, you could go moral and ethical questions too.
Right.
I mean, obviously, the computer brings it up. That's it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you really could. You could read all sorts of things into this that perhaps you did or did not intend, Robert. But things about, you know, the. I mean, just to get more didactic, expanding on what Emmett said, you know, themes about, like, do you need to be with someone who's of the same religion? Do you need to be with someone who's of the same cultural background or ethnicity, or, you know, those types, from the same city, or, you know, whatever the thing is, the same age? Like, how similar do you need to be? And the idea that in this story that the choice is actually, it's not even similar, it's clone. You know, like, literal. And actually, now that I think about it, this it's similar to the book of Genesis, where Eve is supposedly created from Adam's rib. So this isn't that different.
Yeah,
That's how humanity is born. And so now we're talking about that again, but using some DNA. So is that supposed to be more appropriate than, you know, and then some other type of relationship? Is the point of the relationship to procreate? Which is what Dave seems focused on, and, you know, she can't offer that, so she has a different idea. But then that leads to a lot of, and you can think about, like, same-sex relationships. Like, if you can't procreate together, does that mean the relationship is invalid?
Yeah. I think the ship, in that, really, the final page says some interesting things about, like, what is a planet and what is death. Because from her point of view, she's having a relationship with one Dave, even if he dies over and over again and she clones him again and again and wakes him up. That those deaths and those births are sort of an insignificant change from her point of view. That was what I got from it, at least.
Yeah.
And so then we think about, is there a meaningful difference between the ship and a planet that we all live on? They're both closed systems, more or less. Is there a big difference between a grandparent and a child? Things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think, unless anyone has any additional comments or questions, or if Bob has any additional comments or questions, I think
good.
Yeah, I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Robert Beech and Mackenzie Hurlburt, for sharing your work with us. And again, thanks to everyone who has read at Local Lit at Lotta, who's taken our stage and been brave enough to share their work. You know, that's a big thing for an author, especially if they haven't been published or haven't been through a writing program and trained in any way. It can be very scary to present your work, especially in front of a live audience, and you have no idea what people will say. And authors have definitely told me privately that they were nervous as hell to speak, you know, to read their work. So, so I just want to acknowledge that we really, you guys have been brave, and we really appreciate you sharing your work with us. And thank you so much to the audience, because without you guys, this event would just be a bunch of writers sitting around talking about their work. And it's been really, really special to hear your thoughts and your questions, and to discuss these works with you. And I appreciate you so much for being here and for sticking with it. And you know, yeah, thank you. And Kate, I see your very kind response. Thank you so much, authors and facilitators, Rebecca and others. Thank you, Kate. And Josie says, thanks for the last 2 years of Lotta Lit and for giving me the boost to really focus on writing. Oh, absolutely. My pleasure, and I think I can say Emmett's and Sarah's as well. Yeah, thank you so much, Josie. And again, I want to give big thanks to Emmett and Sarah, who have just been really amazing teammates in this, and to Erin, who's not with us tonight, unfortunately, and who left us to go to grad school in New York. But you know, thank God that she helped me organize this from the beginning. So, and then Jamie says, thank you, authors Mackenzie and Bob, and our host Rebecca, and my fellow audience members. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you around.
Thank you. We'll miss this.
Thank you, Marissa. This has been recorded, so I will make that available. I'll send it out through the Local Lit newsletter. And I may also send it out through my newsletter, my Creativity Prescription newsletter. So I think, you know, if you want to stay in touch, if you want information about writing, you know, you can keep reaching out to us either at the Local Lit at Lotta email account. You can reach out to me directly. And of course, Sarah, you can buy her book, which is on Amazon right now. And I am mortified that I'm blanking on the title of it. I can see the cover. Tell us.
Okay, I'll plug it real quick. It's called Senseless Women, and it's a short story collection, got a bit of magical realism. There is a story where a train falls in love with a passenger. I'm not sure I handled it as well as Bob handled the ship, but you know, buy the book and you can be the judge.
Yeah. And many of our authors have books in print, and so you can see information about that on the website and in our latest newsletter. So All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Everyone for getting together. All right. I'm going to shut off the stream now.
Okay.
Poor guy.
Nice work. Yeah. Good job, you guys. Thanks. Wow. Can't believe it's over.